What's going on, everyone? Anthony here with HD Toys, and welcome back to another video. And before I start today's video, I just want to say I hope everyone had a happy holidays, a very Merry Christmas, and if you're watching this after Friday, I hope you had a great New Year's as well. Now, if you are one of the few people watching this on the day of upload, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for all the continued support you've given this channel. We were able to hit 2,000 subscribers this year, which is a huge milestone for this channel. Obviously, there are tons of other big YouTubers out there, D Amazing, MCU Collector, the list goes on, but you guys keep coming back to my channel, and I greatly appreciate that. I don't get figures from Hasbro to review early. I don't have the funds to buy figures from overseas to review them early. So as they come in, I get them as soon as possible. So thank you so much for continuing to come back to this channel. You obviously value my opinion. Well, some of you guys value my opinion more than others, but either way, thank you so much for coming back. Now, with the introductions out of the way, what do you say we get into today's video? And in today's video, we are picking the top 10 Power Rangers Lightning Collection action figures of 2021. Now, what qualifies you to get on this list? First and foremost, you have to have been a US regular release figure. So I don't count Finster being on one of those because those were handed out to certain YouTubers to review beforehand. So obviously that wasn't a retail release. Other figures like the Ecliptor and Astronomer 2-pack, the Red Sentry Ranger, Mikey and April were found in other countries like Canada, Malaysia, China, the Philippines. Those don't count because they never got a US release. So as long as they were released in the US somehow by GameStop, Hasbro Pulse, Walmart, Target, Dorkside, BBTS, Entertainment Earth, however have you, as long as they were based in the US and released in the US, that is how you get on this list. Next up, I have to have you in hand. I don't count figures that I wasn't able to get, obviously, due to it not coming in my area. But with that being said, even though you don't see all of them here, I do have every single Lightning Collection figure released in the US as of this year. So obviously that isn't going to play too huge of a factor in my decision. I was lucky enough to where it was readily available in my area, or pre-orders were able to ship out to me before the end of the year. Now, with how you get on the list out of the way, where you place on the list requires a few criteria, and those criteria is one being paint, deco, and aesthetics. Now, I'm not talking about like mispaints, like, you know, these are obviously mass-produced assembly line toys. There's going to be mispaint matches here and there, like sloppily done, lines not lining up, stuff like that. No, what I'm talking about is paint choices where like something was omitted or changed colors somehow, or it's just all out wrong. Those are the paint decos I'm talking about. Next up will be price point. Obviously, there was a price increase in the middle of this year. It went from a base of $19.99 for a standard release figure to $22.99 for a standard release figure. Some store exclusives being $24.99, other store exclusives like Hasbro Pulse being $26.99. Target even has a $20.99 shell-shaded pink figure. Now, that figure wasn't released here in the US, so obviously that isn't going to play too much of a factor, but that is one of the factors that determines where on this list you place in the top 10. And last, but not as important of a decision for me because they all share the same body mold, is articulation. How is the articulation done? Is it done better than others somehow? Is it done worse than others somehow based off like armor pieces or whatnot? But because they all share basically the exact same body mold, that doesn't play too huge of a factor into it, but there are some figures that have different body sculpts, so obviously that has to play a factor. Now, with the criteria of it being on the list out of the way, what do you say we jump into number 10? Okay, so if you guys just skipped to this part of the video, I'm just going to rehash one more time what were the criteria that involved them getting on this top 10 list. That is paint deco, accessories, portrait sculpts, price, and articulation. So with that being said, that made my number 10 spot really hard, seeing as how she was my number one pick figure for 2021. Obviously, if you guys watched last year's video, I'd made a video of my top 10 most wanted Power Rangers Lightning Collection action figure videos, and Scorpina was at the top of my list. So for her to come out and not be higher on the list is kind of disappointing, but the reasons for that were the gold on her. Obviously, mine is a much better gold now, but it came in like, see if I can find a spot where I didn't paint it very well. Okay, so on her boots, it's a very more yellowish gold than it is on my painted version. So obviously this is a much better gold. I still need to put like a matte varnish on it, but overall you get the idea. And for being a 40, I think it was like a 40 something dollar 2-pack, I think they could have did a lot better on the gold options, especially with some of the other figures on this list that had a much better gold paint scheme. Now, her head sculpt is great. I think it looks fabulous. It's a good likeness of what Scorpina may have looked like. Now, obviously, it is not Sabrina Liu 100%. Obviously, this is the one it's based off of, not season 1. But you guys get the idea. It's close enough to where it could just stand in the display and not look funny or out of place. And another reason why it's so low on this list is because of this weird hip gap going on right here. I don't know what's going on, and it's not just my figure. I bought a second one too, just to be sure, mainly because in case I messed up on the paint, but it has the same weird thigh gap going on right here that just looks out of place. I wish it was a little bit higher. Maybe to clear up some more of that gap. I don't know what they could have done, honestly. But yeah, that is basically why this is number 10 on my list. Still a great figure. So number 9 for me is going to be Mighty Morphin Eye Guy. Now this is from the Deluxe / Monster line Wave 2. Not sure what they're calling it anymore, but it is one of their more expensive figures. But as you can see, it is entirely all new sculpt. Great sculpting all around this figure. The only reason it is not much higher on the list is from the lack of paint details that they've given it. This guy, if any of the figures for sure needed a wash, it was definitely this guy. They gave it a wash on the hands and the head, but for whatever reason skipped everything else. They only painted in some of the eyeballs, and then the ones that are painted, only some of those had the irises or pupils in them. So it was kind of like a half-ass, half-go-at-it type of deal. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that this sculpt was amazing, and Scorpina didn't have that weird thigh gap, they probably would have reversed spots. But because of that thigh gap and the paint, this one just had to be moved up just slightly higher because it is an amazing sculpt. And this little gimmicky feature of it opening and closing is a great detail. The eyeball inside even moves. What people are donning as the contact lens. Both of these come out so you can port in a lightning effect piece, which I think is really great. The only reason it's not even higher on the list is because of the lack of articulation. It's just weird that this thing only really goes side to side. It doesn't look forward at all. Like as soon as you get it down, it pops right back up into place. If it would have maybe looked down, it probably could have gotten away with it. But for the simple fact that it really only has leg, waist, and arm articulation, it's all more or less a 5-point articulation figures. But it is what it is. Still a great sculpt. All it needs is a black wash, a little bit more articulation, or at least the articulation done better. And I think that would have moved it up. But with that being all said, it is number 9 on my 2021 list. Moving on. So number 8 for me is the Morphed Shredder from the TMNT set that just recently came out from GameStop or Dorkside, depending on where you're able to get yours at. And this was a tough decision for me, mainly because I do love the overall design of this figure. I love the cloth cape. I love the gold that they went with. But for me, what really kind of like pushed it a little bit further down was the price point of this figure. It being a $30+ figure just is a bit too much for me for the size. Yes, it is bigger than your standard Lightning Collection figure, but it's only by like an inch. And honestly, they didn't go all out on him. They did go a good amount out, but not all out. Like the golds that should be gold in some spots are painted very nicely, but then you have like this weird like little section right here where they only use molded gold plastic. And if you guys are wondering, this is actually more of the yellowish gold that Sabrina had on her. Not Sabrina, I keep calling her Sabrina. Scorpina had on her before I painted it gold. So that's why that one was so high on the list. This one just has like a little section of it, so it's not too bad. I just really wish they would have went over it with the metallic gold that they went everywhere else. And then the Morpher should be gold where it's silver. So that is kind of a bit of a letdown for me. But it's mainly just the price point of the figure that really pushed it this far back. I think this should have been like a $26.99 figure. A pseudo deluxe would have you, but I think 30 is just too much for a single figure, even if it is like an inch taller. Granted, it does have a lot of nice sculpting details across his shins and like forearms and like shoulder pads with the little spikes going on. But I don't think that's enough to warrant it as like a deluxe figure. Seeing as how, like, for example, the Age of Apocalypse Sabretooth that just recently came out this year is like even taller than this one and much bulkier. And that one was still at the $19.99 price point. Granted, they could probably use that buck over and over. This one, they probably can't, but who knows. But yeah, that is basically why this figure is this high on the list. So, moving on. So, number 7 for this list is obviously has a lot to do with what the last figure had problems with, and that is price per product. Obviously, this is an all-new sculpt, but it is a much heftier figure and definitely warrants a $30 feel. And honestly, the reason it's higher than I got is because, like, even though it may not have a black wash on it, I could be wrong, it may have it, it looks like it has a black wash on it. The skin tone on this figure is phenomenal. It is done so nicely. His mouth opens a crazy amount. So if you had the Comic-Con or a PulseCon exclusive ones and all the little food accessories, they all fit in there as storage. The sculpting details across his, like, gladiator style helmet going on here, his fork and knife accessories. The only thing really that like put it this much further ahead is the fact that it didn't come with the food accessories, and that if you wanted the food accessories, you'd have to pay the extra $30 for the PulseCon exclusive one. And I hate to hold that against it, but it's obviously a marketing plan for that, or not marketing, but like it was definitely in their sales plan to obviously, all right, we need to charge more for this figure. Let's throw in a couple of food items and double the price. They could have easily just thrown that in with this figure. I felt like if they wanted to, maybe make it $35. There's no way this thing should have been $60 for like a cardboard lunchbox and some 3 food accessories. So yeah, great figure at this price point. Sucks that it didn't come with more accessories, but it is what it is. Moving on. So number 6 on my list is probably a surprise for most people on why she's so high, but honestly, this is a prime example of what can be done in the line if they really wanted to. Obviously, you have the correct white trim around her visor. That is done correctly. You have the gold around her wrist. That is done correctly. Her face sculpt is done phenomenally. It's definitely one of their better face sculpts out there. I do wish they would have went with more of her straight hair look in the earlier seasons, because this lends itself more towards Turbo in my opinion. I do realize she had this towards the later half of the season, but honestly, I think I would have preferred the straight hair version and then give us this version for Turbo. But yeah, very underrated figure. The only thing that didn't push it higher is obviously it doesn't come with like double elbows. That I think Shelby is going to be the first with female double elbows and pinless knees. They could have given her pinless knees. I don't know. But I feel like a number 6 spot definitely works for this figure. It is done correctly. The only thing it's really missing is the black at the bottom of the boots, which wouldn't be too big of a deal, but for some reason they gave it to Zeo Pink. I don't know what's going on, Hasbro, but you obviously can do everything correctly. It is shown here in this Tanya figure. Yeah, that's why I got number 6. Number 5. And this, moving on to the bottom half of this list, or the top half, the latter half, whatever you want to call it, was definitely a lot harder for me to narrow down which figures needed to be in these spots. But number 5 definitely needed to go to Zane, the Silver Ranger, which is technically a Walgreens exclusive, but Hasbro Pulse released it first, which is weird because Hasbro Pulse never releases anything first. But here it is. It is done in this nice pearlescent silver plastic. It's not painted silver. It is done in a pearlescent silver plastic, similar to how the metallic Rangers are done. So that is a very nice plus. The head sculpt isn't as bad as most people make it out to be. You know, the Jay Leno head sculpt. I do think it's rather close to what it is, more so than the promo shots. And it's definitely a lot better than these 2-pack with the Psycho Silver head sculpt in it. So yeah, and then being at only $22.99 and you still get a pearlescent body mold, I think it is a great figure. The only thing that probably would have made it better, and this is debatable, I know some people like this, I think they should have just went with like a silver paint like they did on Psycho Silver. But it is what it is. It's still pretty high on the list. Top 5 is nothing to like fret about. So, moving on. So, the number 4 spot for me will be Kai, the Lost Galaxy Blue Ranger. And this is probably another surprise for most people because it is a much lesser known character than say Tanya was, but it is a prime example that Hasbro does listen to us during these fan outcries. So obviously in like the promo shots, whenever this was shown off, the upper part of this helmet trim was white, but they corrected it to silver, how it's supposed to be. And then right here on the Trans Dagger? I forget what it's called. The Quasar Saber. They showed off the lion stamp, which is the same as the Lost Galaxy Red, but eventually it was shown to be the actual gorilla that it should be on the final product. And then the head sculpt alone just screams Kai. Like they just straight up took it out of the episodes from way back when and put it onto toy form. I think this is a prime example of how Hasbro can do something right with this line, but for whatever reason they choose to like not go full out or not listen to the fan outcry sometimes. I don't know how long ago this was in production. For all we know, the white one was straight up promo and it was always meant to be silver helmet. But either way, everything that people wanted to be correct on this ended up being correct. And then this is probably the top head sculpt that's done so far this year, in my opinion. Obviously, these likenesses will lend from person to person, but I feel like this is definitely, if it's not the number one, it's definitely up there as the number one head sculpt. And that is why it got such a high spot at number 4. So number 3 for me is going to be the In Space Phantom Ranger. Now, the reasons it's number 3 and not number 4 or not number 2 or not number 1 is going to vary from person to person. But for me, one of the reasons is that it's just this glaring hole that is kind of like, really, I get what they were going for with the blast effect. I just feel like it's like most people don't really display it with the blast effect. So I don't feel like a hole where the ruby should be was warranted enough for it to be right there. And then, I don't know, the sculpting, that's the reason why it's not number 2. But the reason it's not number 4 is because it's such a great sculpt. It had to be moved up on that basis alone. We got our first fully pinless figure in this line with the pinless elbows, the pinless knees. The sculpting on this figure is completely all new. There's nothing reused about this. Like, you have all these pads going on. You had the painted details in the buckle latches right here. It's even painted all the way throughout back. They painted these buckles right there. It's just an overall great figure. And like number 3 between number 4, it definitely had to fight for that spot. But the reason it didn't make number 2 or number 1, for me at least, is this glaring hole. Phantom Ranger was one of my favorite characters growing up. He was just so mysterious. And then another reason is that this up here, it's supposed to be a bronzish color, but for whatever reason they decided to go with the silver color. I guess in more so media today, it's kind of like silverish, and I guess depending on the scene you were watching in Turbo, it was kind of coming off silver. But if you look at the actual prop, which Hasbro has displayed before, it is bronze. So I don't understand why they didn't just use the actual suit as reference over like pictures or scenes. But anyways, number 3 is definitely nothing to gawk at. It is very high on this list, so that just makes number 2 and number 1 that much better, right? So number 2 for me is kind of a cop-out, but at the same time, if I gave each one of these guys their own spot, they would have took up like 25% of the list on their own. So obviously we have the Morph TMNT figures that came out in the 2-packs that I was able to get from GameStop. Unfortunately, GameStop didn't come through on my Mikey pre-order. That was the only one that got pushed back, but it is what it is. So here we go. We have the Morph Donatello, Morph Raphael, and Morph Leonardo. These figures are amazing. I highly recommend them if you can get them. I mean, just look at it. This is something that you thought we would never get in this line because of like Hasbro not owning the full license to TMNT. And for them to be able to get the license, give us these suits straight out of the comic book, and at the same time give us civilian head sculpts. Even though a lot of people don't like them, I think they look great being turtle head sculpts. Yeah, they do look kind of out of place on like morphed bodies, but it's still great that we got them. They have pinless elbows, pinless knees. They come with their weapons. They come with the holsters for their weapons. The weapons are nicely detailed. The articulation on these figures are great. Even though they are hindered just a tiny bit by the shell, it's still technically all there. And then they got a great range of motion in them. And honestly, like, the only reason it's not number one is because of their price point. They are a bit high. Granted, they have to share a license with Nickelodeon, but it is what it is, right? So yes, that being said, these guys are my number 2 pick for 2021. So before I go into my number 1 pick, I just want to give an honorable mention to these 3 figures right here. Obviously, these figures are very good in their own right. Adam having the perfect Adam head sculpt, the 2-pack being such an awesome set with the 2 different head sculpts that they come with, and then the Red Ranger having the correct Red Ranger helmet finally. But there were a few glaring things I just couldn't overlook to push them past the figures that did make it on the list. For Adam as example, he has the white outline, or the silver outline instead of the white outline, and then no gold around the cuff. I know it's very inconsistent, but like I said, paint deco has a lot to do with where they place on this list. And it was a toss-up between him and Tanya, honestly, but Tanya with the correct factors in her, and then having the awesome head sculpt that she came with just kind of edged out Adam, so I had to move him off the list. And then obviously with the COG 2-pack, I think it's just too expensive for being an Army Builder 2-pack, especially with the single pack released. Now, a lot of people are going to say it came with a lot of accessories, and it did, which would have been fine if they didn't announce the single pack so soon that came with all the exact same accessories. Personally, as an Army Builder 2-pack, I would have preferred it come with less accessories and just the cogs themselves, instead of being like a little bit more than retail. I think these came out to be like $42 on Hasbro Pulse. So that did play a factor. And then the same factor played into the metallic Red Ranger. I think, honestly, I was lucky enough to pre-order at $24.99 and got that price point. But if you weren't lucky enough to pre-order it before the price hike, this figure is $26.99 after shipping and taxes. If you don't have like the Hasbro Pulse exclusive and you have to pay for shipping, it comes out to be a $30+ figure in some cases, depending on the taxes in your area. Even though it's a great looking figure, I love the translucent plastic. I love the corrected helmet sculpt. The Rocky head sculpt is better, but it's still not that great in my opinion. But it's the main factor that pushed it off was it being $30 for a single figure and not getting very much out of it. So yeah. And my number 1 pick for 2021 is probably not a surprise to most people, and that is the Tango Warrior. I mean, look at this guy. This guy came out before the price hike, and even then, it's still like, for this guy to be $19.99 at retail is crazy in my mind. Look at the sheer size of him compared to like a regular Ranger. He is so bulky, and he's about half an inch taller, so he's not that much taller like the Shredder is, but he's definitely much bulkier than Shredder is, and Shredder is at $30. And then you figure, okay, well, maybe because he's $19.99, he doesn't come with a lot of accessories. You'd also be wrong there. He comes with 2 sets of hands, one open hand, one closed hands. He comes with 2 sets of wings, one open set as displayed on him right now, and then a closed set if you want him for more of a relaxed look. And then maybe you think, okay, well, the paint might be off. No, the metallic paint that they decide to use on this figure is phenomenal. It is done so nicely and is so shiny that like it doesn't really come off on camera as it does in person. It comes off great. Now, maybe you're thinking articulation is off. It has all the articulation you need out of this figure. It has the double jointed knees, it has the elbows, it has the upper bicep, it has the butterflies, it even has beak articulation. It is crazy. We didn't need this level of articulation on here. He does only have single jointed elbows, but which isn't too big of a deal. He still gets his good range of motion even without double elbows. So, and then he also comes with like the cool egg accessories that Rito gave to Rita as a gift. It's just, you got everything you wanted with this figure and then some. So yeah, this had to be my number 1 pick for 2021. All right, guys, and that is my top 10 Power Rangers Lightning Collection figure of 2021. What do you guys think? Are these guys on your list? Are they in the exact same orders? And if not, which ones did I not pick that you think deserved a spot? Or do you think the Tango Warrior should have been lower? Should Pudgy Pig have been higher? Let me know, guys. Obviously, these top 10 lists are going to range from tuber to tuber. Everyone has their own reasons for picking whatever reasons. I try to be as unbiased as possible. I know a lot of people are choosing what needs to be on the list versus what doesn't need to be on the list based on their favorite character. And that's obviously fine. That's what they want to pick. But for me, I mean, I try to be as unbiased as possible. Obviously, I chose Sabrina as my 2021 most wanted figure, but she ended up being number 10. So that just goes to show you that I try to be as unbiased as possible and like really look at my criteria on where they needed to be. That being price, paint, articulation, accessories, those type of things. And once again, these figures are all figures obviously that I own, all figures that have been released regularly in the US. And yeah, hopefully 2022 gives us a ton of figures. Even though a lot of them were supposed to come out this year, we still got a ton of figures, and it made this list very hard to narrow down. I really wanted to choose a lot more, but I had to look at it from mainly a price point perspective versus what we're getting, and that is how I got my list. So guys, let me know down below which one's your top 10, in which order or not in any order. And hopefully we will have a great 2022. So until next time guys, later.